Okay.
And you guys will tell me when we're starting, right?
Well, thank you everyone for coming. We're going to give it a couple of minutes just to make sure folks can file into the virtual room, and we will start shortly for our talk.
Hello, Chris Ho. How are you?
Good.
Good to see you.
Good
very
seeing
excited.
you too.
Ben, you look the same.
You do too.
No, I look old
the
and
Zoom.
boomy.
No, it's the Zoom.
I need a younger filter.
Mega just taught me how to do that.
Really? Mega looks glamorous too. Hi, Mega. Okay, I'm gonna be quiet.
Okay, I think we're ready. Austin, want to go?
Okay, great. All right. Thanks everybody for joining us today. I'm Austin Thomas. I'm from FIT in New York, and we're happy that you're all here. And I'm happy to co-present this program with the Hyde Park Art Center in Chicago. Thank you, Meka Ralapati and Sarah McKissick. And a shout out to Troy Richards, the Dean of the School of Art and Design at FIT, joining us today. Thank you. And thanks to our special guest, Abigail DeVille, FIT alum and former artist in residence at FIT, and Christopher K. Ho, our current artist fellow working remotely from Colorado. Today, they will be in conversation about their recent public pieces. Abigail just unveiled Light of Freedom, a public art piece in Madison Square Park. Congratulations on that piece and the many projects you are currently involved in. From the recent Get Out the Vote billboard, it worked, and the amazing work you have on view now at the Simon Lee Gallery here in New York City. You continue to transcend histories into your own story and into the broader inspirational human story. We are honored that you continue to bring FIT along on the journey. Thank you for coming back today. And Christopher Ho, thank you for helping bring this all together. I know you will also lead us on an artistic and thoughtful journey and discuss your complex work on view at the Asia Society in Hong Kong. When planning this project, we wanted to have artists connect and converse about artist residencies and how doing a program like this one and having an artist residency program wherever you are is one way to build community. With that, I hand it over to Abigail.
Thank you, Austin, and thank you everyone for being here today. Thank you, Christopher. Thank you, Hyde Park Arts Center. I'm going to share my screen real quick and just run through some images and briefly introduce the project Light of Freedom. Okay. So this is just a quick PowerPoint presentation of some of the things that I was thinking about initially in researching for the project. So in about June, Madison Square Park Conservancy asked me if I'd be interested in doing a project in the park. And I was really excited and honored to think about what I could possibly do that could potentially talk about everything that is currently still unraveling here in 2020. And I found this Frederick Douglass quote, and it inspired me to think. It directly, you know, I felt like that it neatly encapsulated everything that continues to happen and unfold in this nation. So I'll just read it briefly. Let me give you a word of the philosophy of reform. The whole history of the progress of human liberty shows that all concessions yet made to her august claims have been born of earnest struggle. The conflict has been exciting, agitating, all-absorbing, and for the time being, putting all other tumults to silence. It must do this or it does nothing. If there is no struggle, there is no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet depreciate agitation are men who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its many waters. So in researching the history of Madison Square Park, I found this image that this is from the New York Public Library, but the torch was installed in Madison Square Park from 1876 to 1882 while they were trying to raise money and stir up interest in Americans actually wanting to put money forth for a pedestal to be constructed for the Statue of Liberty, and, you know, which is... it's hilarious. I'm not throwing shade at Americans, but, you know, like French laborers, working class people were the ones who raised, I think it was 600,000 francs in order to have the Statue of Liberty built in the first place as a gift to the American people and its centennial that, you know, you guys made it through a civil war. You made it 100 years. This might be, you know, this might be for real. But anyway, so this is the torch that was installed, the southern view of it from I think like 23rd Street. And so when I stumbled upon the image, I just thought that it encapsulated everything that we continue to struggle with within this nation, and thinking about it as a perfect form that could carry or contain all of the, you know, the conversations that have continually been at the forefront of ideas of what potentially liberty is or what it means in the American context. And then thinking specifically through the replacement of the flame, which happened around 1986. They wanted, and for the centennial placement of it being here in New York Harbor, they replaced the old flame with the one that was more in line with Bartoli, the artist's vision of what the torch was originally supposed to be. So this one was removed and is on view on Liberty Island. And then also I was inspired by the scaffolding that encases it around it. And so then I took direct inspiration from that in the sculpture. This is a bell that is an old school bell that came from a small town in Illinois that is inside of the sculpture. And so this shows you the original flame. and the one that was replaced that is currently at the Statue of Liberty. So this was the original drawing that I did when I had the idea and thinking about, I wanted it to be porous and thinking about all the kinds of energies and lives that have passed through, all the people that have contributed, and you know how also the structure of the interior structure of the Statue of Liberty, it breathes itself. The way in which it was engineered and constructed is built to move, and so that it has constantly moved since it's been installed for the last 140 years. And I think that that also, you know, thinks about the ways in which ideas of liberty have flex to them, and how it is that it's utilized or used depending upon who's wielding it. The top of the flame here in the drawing, I was thinking about having mannequin limbs shooting out of it, and just thinking about that the you know, the best of us is the kinds of continual like democratic passion and fire that burns within different demographics that find themselves here in the United States, and pushing for actually, you know, the United States fulfilling its potential or its promise to affording liberty to anybody who lives here. So this is it installed in the park. It opens on October 27th and is on view through January 31st. I like this image because there's a dog in it. And then at night it's lit. I should mention also that the scaffolding is painted gold.
Thank you, Abigail. I look forward to hearing more about that project in your discussion. I will introduce myself. My name is Megha Ralapati. I oversee the residency program at Hyde Park Art Center in Chicago. And our residency program aims to connect artists deeply with their own practice in the context of our community. So each year we invite international, national, and Chicago-based artists and curators to take part in a uniquely immersive residency experience and complement their modes of production, their ways of making, with an increased attention to reflection, to reconnection, and research to spark new ideas and considerations of what's local, what's global, what's familiar, what's possible. So I'm very happy to introduce Christopher K. Ho, an artist, thinker, teacher, curator, and writer whose dynamic practice exemplifies shape-shifting. And it was Chris who initiated this conversation about two artists making work, connect, and their relationships with residency programs. Chris's own work pushes against easy categories of geography and culture, of artistic medium, authorship, and other very important ideas. And it was for these qualities we invited Chris in 2014 to be a curator in residence with us at the Art Center. And he co-curated an exhibition, The Chicago Effect, on the occasion of Hyde Park Art Center's 75th anniversary. So we like to think we hooked Chris on Chicago through that process. Chris has recently presented his own work at Parasite in Hong Kong, the Brooklyn Academy of Music, the Bronx Museum, the Guangdong Times Museum, and the Queens Museum, among many others. So Chris, with that, I'll turn it over to you to share your work and then lead the conversation with Abigail.
Thank you so much, Megha, and thanks to Hyde Park Art Center, Austin, Troy, and also FIT and Abigail. So I'm gonna try to share my screen now. So I'm going to share a project with you that I currently have up. Like Abigail's, it'll be up till January, and it is in Asia Society in Hong Kong. And it's a project that I'll try to keep the kind of my talk about it descriptive, and then maybe Abigail and I could kind of get into the content during our discussion. So it's a two-part installation with, on the right-hand side, a brass model looking at, on the left, a banner featuring US gymnast Mary Lou Retton, who won the all-around gold medal during the LA Olympics in 1984. And the model theater itself, and here I just isolated it so that we can see it from all four sides, is modeled after Ford's Theater, which is where President Lincoln was shot. And the model sits on a pedestal that recalls a gymnast's vault. And here's a section on the right of the now demolished Ford's Theater in Washington, DC. And for the curtains for the model, I used traditional formats for, lack of a better term, totally obnoxious names like Empire, Victory, and Squire. And center stage in the model is a miniature table set with a tiny, glimmering Thanksgiving turkey. And I should mention here that the installation's title is Always Stop Eating While You're Still a Little Hungry. And that's a quote from John D. Rockefeller Sr. It's kind of one of his favorite quotes. And I find the contrast between his vast fortune made out of oil quite striking with the sentiment of this quotation. And Rockefeller Money also founded Asia Society, where the work is currently shown. So here's a detail of one of the sides of the model. And for those of you of a certain age, you'll recognize this looking at the red and yellow swans at the top. You'll recognize this as a magic eye. And a magic eye is an optical trick where if you stare at it and cross your eyes, a secret image will appear. And I made these magic eyes by combining backgrounds that draw from American spectacles, like in this case, the Olympics, but for other facets, Republican National Conventions, July 4th parades, and marches at Colonial Williamsburg. So that's the theater. What about the banner? The banner is 432 feet long, and it's viewable from where the model theater sits. And it features, as mentioned, the US all-round gold winner during the 1984 Olympics. So why 1984? That was the first Olympics where the People's Republic of China on the right and the Republic of China, which we know as Taiwan, on the left, competed together, and it was the first time they competed together since China's Civil War. And today, you know, in the newspapers, when we read about tensions in the Taiwan Straits or China being mad at the US selling arms to Taiwan, it's technically because this war, the Civil War, never really concluded. 1984 was also the year that Britain, we see a little Margaret Thatcher on the lower left, signed a treaty with China that agreed to hand over Hong Kong, my homeland, back to China. And so, yeah, it's a version of decolonization, a term that is very popular today, but it's complicated by the fact that Hong Kong wasn't exactly being given independence. It was essentially being passed from one empire to another empire. And the timing of my project actually was during the protests in Hong Kong. And here I want to recall Abigail's opening quotation by Frederick Douglass about struggle and progress. What fascinated me, and what continues to fascinate me, is this kind of use of nationalist symbols under the cover of rubrics like peace or democracy or unity. The Statue of Liberty, the Olympics being a kind of transnational ceasefire. As well, I'm interested in the way that one country can take the symbols of another as shorthand. So here on the right of the banner, circled in yellow, Mary Lou Retton opens her hand as she sticks her final winning vault. And this gesture of 5 fingers open was that used by Hong Kong protesters earlier this year to symbolize their 5 demands that they were asking China and the Hong Kong government to give them. And I cannot describe how odd it was to be in the US and in Hong Kong earlier this year and have the American flag and our president, soon to be ex-president, means such different things. On the one hand, the failure of democracy and the rise of authoritarian impulses, and on the other, simultaneously, as a beacon for democracy. And this is where I would like to end and open up the discussion, perhaps linking it to Abigail's comment about how the US provides this kind of promise of liberty, as well as a very intriguing turn of phrase that that Abigail used in her presentation. And I believe if I wrote it down correctly, it's flexible ideas of liberty. And I would love to open the conversation by asking Abigail, perhaps if you can elaborate on this interesting turn of phrase, flexible ideas of liberty.
Sure, I think, as I used it as it relates to thinking about the engineered structure that was built to like hold the Statue of Liberty together, and how it's porous and riveted together, and when it can withstand 150-mile-an-hour winds, but in the ways in which liberty has flexed in terms of I think out of the mouth that it's kind of coming out of, or the hand that's using it, or the legacy, or the history, and the kind of the bodies that have been left in wake that are directly associated with the person that is trying to use it. I think when people are trying to overthrow the yoke of oppression, and they're speaking about liberty in its kind of purest form, right, its truest form, right, they're talking about the liberty of their own bodies, of their lives, of their labor, and potentially of family members and future generations, but in the ways in which it is used against people by governments, and even here in this, democratic experiment we have here on our shores, right? That liberty was always constructed to be for the wealthy, or for originally the entrepreneurial white man landowner, and not really very, very much space for anyone else. And that's the ways in which these systems have been set up, and in the ways in which people have been pushing and brushing and throwing themselves against that, for as long as, the Declaration of Independence has been written, right? Like we hold these truths to be self-evident, right? That, people are created equal. I mean, really? I mean, it's an interesting promise. It's a really great press release. But I don't know, like as a mission statement, flawless. In practice, my God, really? But yeah, anyway, so and then I guess then in that there's spaces, I guess, between letters and words, right? And ways that there's slippage and pores between language and how it's wielded and used against people.
I really appreciate that comment about it being a perfect mission statement, and perhaps complicated, nuanced, and difficult in execution. I also think that liberty is really fascinating, because often, especially in the West, and increasingly in the East, we rhyme liberty or freedom of, say, bodies with the freedom of circulation of goods, which is to say the liberty of circulation of goods in capitalism. And I think kind of you referenced this when you spoke about the labor of the French workers who both donated and likely actually fabricated the torch and the statue for the United States. And I think that's a very kind of insightful angle into the Statue of Liberty that your work proposes. I'm also fascinated to ask you to think a little bit about, or speak a little bit about, the use of the Statue of Liberty and possibly contemporary art, possibly even your art, as a nationalistic symbol. In other words, the way that, not just thinking about the Statue of Liberty in terms of the US, but actually thinking about it as an exchange between the French and the Americans, and how art might function. Let's just keep it personal and say how your art might function in such a scenario.
Well, I think it's interesting to think about that it was made, or it goes part and parcel with in thinking about the best of humanity, or what humanity ever hopes to attain for that, but can't ever actually necessarily get there, or we haven't really seen it yet. But you know, like a gift from workers to, you know, then American workers, right? A symbol, something that became a symbol for the oppressed, or for refugees, or for generations of immigrants, as a signifier for a fresh, clean slate, a new beginning, right? And then also, you know, thinking about all the loaded, you know, iconography that is already embedded within the Statue of Liberty, and, you know, the fact that Bartoli, the sculptor, and, you know, based the sculpture on the Roman goddess Libertas, but then also that there's Masonic symbols that are, you know, embedded within it, and then how that became this kind of, you know, like secret society within Europe that was birthed out of the medieval guilds, and sort of how it was like a hardcore white man club, you know, for a really long time. I think only in France, it might be the only country that has it open to men and women, but, you know, as almost like a secret society that has its own kind of, and not to get all like Illuminati and crazy, you know, but you know what I mean? Like how that is already embedded within the currency, within ideas of liberty. So even if the sculptor had, you know, even Bartoli's best intentions, right, where it was a gift in hopes and a prayer and lighting a candle for, you know, maybe France's potential future liberty, and the relationship that France and America have all entangled up with each other, right? How France helped fund the Revolutionary War to begin with. We wouldn't be America without France, right? And so then thinking about, you know, in their hopes and dreams, they have that, especially in that moment, had, you know, they had money on, you know, America succeeding, right? Like, you know, people were really hedging their bets that this experiment is going to work because I need it to work, because I need another kind of governmental system for myself, right? And so, anyway, but yeah, I think it's interesting in the ways that artists can be these kinds of, I don't know, like conductors. I'm thinking of Mickey Mouse and Fantasia, right? Like, you know, like, and thinking about the ways in which all of these elemental things, all of this densely layered iconography, imagery, information, material, history can coalesce into something that will be used as a political symbol, or as a pawn that's outside of, you know, whatever original intention was, but that has the potential and ability to speak to generations of people. And now we see that this sculpture, you know, has been speaking for 140 years, but thinking about how complex it was in its formation, and then how that has kind of, you know, almost been stamped out like a license plate, you know, as a carrier, like, you know, the torch bearing a kind of enlightenment for the world or whatever, or here is a picture of what democracy or free society could potentially be or look like.
I think that's a great answer, and I appreciate your saying that pointing out that advocating for liberty on France's part, there is some selfishness or there is something about that is not just generous, right? That you also need someone on your side. And I often think about that when I think about the relationship between Taiwan and the US. I mean, the US just desperately needs an ally in the East. So it's selfish as well as, bringing democracy to the world. I actually do want to get all Illuminati on you in a second, because I know your work is filled with really fascinating symbols and iconography. But before we do that, let's take a pause and open it up to a couple of questions so far. And then, let's see if there are questions. If there aren't any, then I would love to delve into the symbolism in your Light of Freedom project. So are there any questions or comments from audience members? Oh, come on, there must be. I do see someone with arms raised. You have no name, but please go ahead. In the glasses. Dan.
Yeah, that's Dan. Yeah, just a comment, which I wonder, it seems to me that in both cases, like the histories, like the French and American, that sort of common history and revolution, or like having this like contiguous period of revolution that spans the two countries. And also in Taiwan and US and China, what's always interesting to me is how in popular kind of political conversation, conflicts and struggles are so easily reduced to dichotomous schemes, when historically they're almost always three-sided. Like in the French and American relationship has everything to do with France's rivalry with England, right? And I almost think of this monument, or the Statue of Liberty is almost like it's like monument politics on a transnational level, where like, oh yeah, France is going to deliver this gift to the U.S. and it's almost like a poke in the eye to the the ousted English rulers who of course who are busy forgetting that they lost that war, right? And I just wonder, like in art, like when we use art to reveal or somehow recharge our understanding of those narratives. In both your cases, it's like you are kind of thinking through these three-way these conflicts that involve more than two parties. It's just more of a comment, I guess. And I just that's why I think art is like, people are like, oh, political art, blah, whatever. But this is actually why, like art about political histories and political topics is so important, is because it kind of like helps to make visible, the complexity of these conflicts that are that are usually not straightforwardly dichotomous.
I really appreciate that comment, Dan. And actually, we have a question in the chat from Valerie Steele, which I think is a open-ended version of and relates to Dan's comment. And Valerie's comment or question is, what do you think is the artist's role in political life? I think that's a great question. Which would you like to? I mean, it's a big question. It's a hard question.
Well, you can I mean, I will just say that as far as like mission statements go, that I've kind of taken James Baldwin's creative process and taken that as my own kind of personal mission statement, and thinking about that the artist's role is a lover's role, which is to reveal the beloved to himself. And so, and thinking about the complex ways in which we occupy space and the histories that we are constantly traversing, whether, you know, knowingly and unknowingly, that, you know, that is your role. Not to say that you're a provocateur, but, you know, to deal with the raw material in which you've been dealt with, you know, here, by living and breathing, taking up space, and that everything is political.
I appreciate that. And actually, I'm going to kind of echo that sentiment in answering Valerie's question. You know, I came of age during a period where political art, whether it was through institutional critique or social practice, was dominant. And I think the lesson that I've learned in more recent years, or more recently, is that those political positions can very easily be appropriated or misappropriated by people with different ideologies and used right back against us. And a clumsy example of that would be the left's critique of absolute truths or universal truths, you know, coming back at us in the past 4 years as a kind of disavowal of facts or science. And so in more recent years, one of the reasons that my work has turned to Hong Kong, someplace maybe closer to my heart than, you know, well, as close to my heart as the United States, is a real attempt to focus on, I mean, personal history just seems so indulgent, but I'm just going to use it. It's personal histories rather than these kind of master political narratives. And I find it very difficult to change from talking about politics on a very, very large kind of diplomatic history level to a much more personal level. It's actually difficult, and hence, in my work, even the one I showed you now, we're still talking about the Olympics, which is politics with a capital P. We're still talking about Margaret Thatcher, again, politics with a capital P. And really, I think it'll take a number of years to get to the point where it is more personal, and in that sense, more nuanced, to get back to what Dan was saying, not just triangulated, but actually really complicated. So I appreciate both Dan's comment as well as Valerie's question. We do have a question specifically for Abigail from Brooke, Cayman Rappaport, and I'd like to mention that Brooke is the curator of Abigail's exhibition. The question is, have you, Abigail, found anything unexpected or surprising now that Light of Freedom is on view at Madison Square Park? And I think that's a great question, especially seeing as you were making a distinction between mission statement and practice. And in this case, I'm sure you had a mission statement in your proposal, but now it's in practice. The thing is in view. So anything unexpected?
I don't know, actually. I don't know. I think maybe, you know, in terms of public response or interaction with the piece, not yet. I haven't been surprised yet. But I think in terms of thinking through the history of New York City or smaller unknown histories, in which I hope to share through the project, I think I've been probably more surprised in that. Or even, you know, and looking at at the goddess Libertas, and finding out and learning that the wreath or the crown that the Statue of Liberty wears was given to freed Roman slaves. And so the fact that, you know, this French sculptor chose a freed slave, right, as the emblem or the person who is bearing light or holding, you know, that the only person that could potentially or possibly value liberty in a way that could be transferred, you know, to, you know, these larger national aims, hopes, would be a freed slave. And I know it's not uncoincidental that he had that project in mind. Like a true artist, he wanted to make that, and he was going to make that, you know, like the first, you know, before the Statue of Liberty, he proposed a project for an Egyptian woman holding a light at the Suez Canal, maybe 30 years before the Statue of Liberty happened. So he always wanted to make something in a monumental scale. And so I will also say that, you know, artists are also self-serving, but, you know, like, you know, and thinking that, you know, that only potentially a formerly enslaved person could be the person that could actually open this conversation and stand there in stoic silence. Though she's silent, she's not speaking, even though she speaks through Emma Lazarus' poem, right? As to potentially what the promise of freedom could bring.
Well, listen, there are also figures in your work. These, I mean, if I can read the mannequins as figures, these blue figures. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because that to me is very much for me, that was what departed the most from the Statue of Liberty's torch. So I feel like there's something important there that I would like to understand.
Well, I think, especially in thinking that they're severed arms, they're not attached to any bodies, and thinking about the kinds of labors that have, the labor that has consistently been valued by imperial powers and you know, the United States, and that, you know, being founded as these conglomerations of colonies, that the whole sole purpose in their creation was for money, right? Like and have a, you know, foundational layers of genocide and exploitation of labor. But and thinking about the kinds of labor that has been valued, or the stories that have been preserved or mythologized, and then also the kinds of, you know, the faceless kinds of stories that have been lost in the tide of history, but that actually are the reason why we exist, or why certain things exist in the way that they do. And so, you know, initially when I was researching the project, I discovered that the first 11 Africans brought to New Amsterdam was in 1626, and they were 11 Angolans. But that's only 2 years after the city was founded. And so then thinking about the kinds of ways in which they participated in feeding the colony. They were they were freed, I think in 1644, 11 slaves petitioned for their freedom from the Dutch West India Company. And, you know, they were the first farmers on Manhattan Island. They fed the colony. But anyway, so thinking about the ways that their labor coincides as in conversation with, you know, the faceless French laborers, with the, you know, the 19th century American laborers, or people who had their names published in Joseph Pulitzer's paper with their, you know, their penny, you know, donations to have the pedestal built. And thinking about that there is a coalition, even though it's through time and space, unknown to each other, that unites all of these workers and these kinds of debased and devalued lives and stories. And so thinking that, you know, it's not about the one hand of, you know, this governmental might or power or imperial power, but the power is really truly in the collective of the people.
I would love to, thank you for that. I would love to echo that. And I'm glad that you mentioned the Dutch West India Company, because in Hong Kong, it was the Dutch East India Company that was the massive semi-national corporation, trade corporation that, well, colonized much of, for the Dutch East India Company, much of Southeast Asia. I also appreciate your discussion of kind of the nameless collective. Mega has a question in the chat that asked me what the response to my work is in Hong Kong. And actually, we'll get to that in a second. We have some Hong Kongers here. Doreen Chan from Chicago is in the audience, so maybe she can answer that better. One thing I would like to say is that the protests in Hong Kong, what was fascinating to me about them was that this namelessness was not so much a kind of condition of oppression as a position of power. So, this idea of being like water, of not being an individual, which is to say not being able to be identified by a governmental power, to think of oneself as a collective through new technology, our apps and our phones, to communicate that way, and to not really have a leader. That was really fascinating to me. And so there are kind of two sides, right, to this namelessness. On the one hand, maybe it's those 11 Angolans who we probably don't know the names of, and then maybe it's also someone who purposefully uses invisibility as a cloak to become a collective, to enact change, and to escape surveillance. Let's ask Doreen. Doreen, what do people think in Hong Kong?
I think how Hong Kong people think is keep changing as well because of the security law already set up like in Hong Kong and the security department. So Chris, what you just mentioned about like be water, I think Hong Kong people like they have to continuously be water, like because now it's more censorship in Hong Kong, especially in school or even college. Yeah. So what Chris just mentioned about, I think may become even more broad and like used applied on more like software or even like in our mind, like, and we still couldn't tell what is it, but I think it's kept changing, and yeah, it's the concept of be water as well. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. And I would love to point out that this year, 2020, going back to Abigail's opening quotation on struggle and progress, there has been struggle across the globe, certainly in Hong Kong, certainly in New York, certainly in the United States. So I would love to kind of spend this last 10 minutes kind of opening it up to questions and even just comments about this past incredible year of struggle, and maybe a note of hope, what progress was initiated through this last year of struggle. And this is to everyone, including Mega and Austin and Troy.
May I just quickly? Okay, so it's silence. It's an interesting sign just for me. So I'm here at FIT, also in Manhattan. I'm from Europe myself, so originally, and for me, this whole last year was an opportunity really for connecting with people around the world now through these Zoom meetings and everything we had here. So I had meetings now with colleagues in Tehran, artists who work there in Iran. So I'm connecting also now better actually to contemporary artists around the world in this situation, this globalization through the network now. So that's what changed for me in these last couple of months.
Alex, thank you for that. And I like that progress doesn't necessarily have to be, it can be on a very individual or personal level. Mega, I'm sorry I interrupted.
No, I was just going to say, I think the learnings are still very much unfolding very slowly as we're in sort of a slow motion process. But I do think a very powerful thing is this, connecting your comments, both of you, Abigail and Chris, about the particular nature of liberty, of democracy that has been outlined in a US Constitution, the sort of origination of that. It really comes to a point now in 2020 where this idea of American exceptionalism, which is related to the design of democracy in this particular way, that exceptionalism has really dissolved over these months. And I think to the point of the struggle, we can think about crossing the borders, crossing national lines, and look to how artists and others have struggled within their own context, struggled with retaining democracy, struggled with leaders who don't step down out of the position. And there's so much to learn for those of us in the US from, post USSR, regimes like former Yugoslavia, those nations, for example, so much of Southeast Asia, where people have experience with this sort of destabilization of democracy, not to mention people have experience with widespread pandemic. So I think maybe there's something, if we can think of it as generative, as when we step off the pedestal of exceptional, we can think of ourselves as in community with artists and others and organizers and activists based across the world on a maybe more even platform. And we can think about sharing and think about what are the methodologies, what are the strategies that can be shared, what can work here, what may not be able to because of our specifics. But that to me feels like it really changes the color of the struggle, but also provides some measure of expanded collectivity, some hope for going through and kind of making, continuing down this path.
Hi, my name is Bree Honeycutt, and I was a resident artist at FIT, and I am now a resident artist at Hancock Shaker Village, and working with Hancock and Shakers and another community called Camp Hill Village, which is for adults with learning disabilities that live in an inclusive communal setting. So I've landed in between two utopias, if you will, and I keep asking myself, well, I don't think it's a coincidence that I've landed and will try to learn through these utopias, and have been thinking about labor and work and how they value it, and how as an artist you communicate that, and that seems to be the artist's struggle in a way, or one of them is how you take these ideas and put them out there. I don't really have, it's just a glimmer of a thought. But I thank you both and all of you for this conversation, thinking about liberty and the human struggle.
Any other comments? Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Okay, well, we have just a few minutes and we have one last question from Susan. And I think this is a good question to end with because it's future oriented. Susan's question is, where do you see your future work going?
Christopher.
Did you want me to take that first?
You take that.
I know, Abigail, I keep on doing this. I feel like I keep on biting for time by saying, Abigail, what do you think? Okay, I'll go first. I think it's really fascinating because much of our conversation so far has been thinking about what art can do and maybe what artists can do to illuminate complexities in our political landscape. What I will say is this. From a lived experience point of view, I, as an artist, do not feel particularly empowered or with agency. I have to say, I am as caught up in political events that are external and outside of my control as probably anyone else. And so where do I see my future work going? It's not that I decide where my future work goes. It's circumstances that decide where I go. So for right now, in the United States, for the past 4 years, as an immigrant, as someone who, you know, has black hair and yellow skin, I haven't necessarily felt welcome or at home. And because of that, again, this has nothing to do with my agency, right? It really is external events. I have, by default, started mostly showing in Asia and refocusing my work and my career on that end of things over there. And so that's my answer. I see my future work going in the direction of Asia, which means in Asia, but also around issues that have to do with Asia, with the codicil that that's not necessarily my choice. It was a choice that was made for me, but I'm going with it. So that may not be the most affirmative answer, but that is my actual answer. So Abigail, how about you?
I don't know. I mean, I feel like I'm gonna continue in this lover's struggle and using you know, history and the contemporary moment to, you know, respond. You know, I mean that's all I can say.
Amazing. I love this idea of responding and taking the struggles of the moment to dig out a little bit of progress. So kudos to Frederick Douglass and to you, Abigail. Thank you guys so much. To Megan and Austin, I'm gonna pass it back to you two. And maybe you'll tell us a little bit more about your future programming under this rubric.
Thank you, Chris and Abigail. Thank you so much. I have to say, for all the flack that Zoom conversations get, this one was really something that felt generative, that we're connected and here and able to hear each other. And it was a special opportunity to hear from you both with a talk that was initiated by Chris, but also to work with Austin and get to know another residency program in New York City. I think most of the participants are from our two cities, maybe from elsewhere, but a fantastic way that we can kind of utilize the digital space to be together and share this space. So thank you all for coming. We must do something else. We must do another program, clearly, for this group and beyond. I would love for you to join our mailing list, and maybe we'll find a way to reach back out to those of you who have joined this conversation to see if we can continue it too. But for now, I will say thank yous again to everyone for joining. And just a quick mention in terms of upcoming programming. Next Saturday, November 21st, Hyde Park Arts Center will have its annual gala, the first virtual version of that, between 7 and 8 p.m. Central, which you're all invited to join, which will have artist interventions, an auction, some special guests, including a conversation between our teen artists and artist Jeff Koons. We'll see what can be learned from that. We invite you to join that. Austin, if there's anything you would like to also mention coming up, feel free.
Well, I just want to thank you. You know, Hyde Park Art Center, it was really great to get to know you. I'll probably attend your virtual gala, my first one, so I'm very excited. We do this every Thursday via Google Meet. We have artists presenting, and next week we have Judith Braun, who is also an FIT alum, and she's on today, and she'll be presenting her work. So we'll continue with this, and we'll do another project, hopefully with Abigail and Christopher Ho. We look forward to you working with our students, and I'm just very appreciative. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day.